It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen's on vacation in London. I'm Craig Hoffman, and we did a bunch of audience research not that long ago, and we were asking folks, amongst other questions, who are some of your favorite guests that we have on? Who are the people that you like seeing crossover episodes with? And nobody got more positive feedback amongst our audience than John Keim, which is why I'm pleased to welcome in this morning, in for Logan, JP Finley, everybody. Hey! No, nothing, John Keim? I don't get even a quasi chuckle for that joke.
No, well, I will say I appreciate my kids and my wife voting in your poll.
Very good, very good. Your joke's better than mine. John Keim is here, everybody, as promised. He's going to do a mailbag with us today. So very excited to answer your questions with John. Of course, ESPN.com, longtime Washington football reporter. And he's got his podcast, The John Keim Report, which is the either first or second. We might be the second favorite, John, amongst many of our listeners. And yours is first, if not top two with our show. So make sure you're checking out the John Keim Report from Empire Media, wherever you get your podcast. They're on YouTube and, of course, all the audio apps. And then don't forget, on Thursday, Logan will still be out, but we're going to do, we talk about good feedback on a guest, John. Jeremy Green. Did you listen to the Jeremy Green episode?
I haven't had a chance. No. I know you. Yeah, I know you've been raving about it.
You definitely got to check that out. And Jeremy's going to rejoin us on Thursday for a mock draft. Dude is hilarious. If you want just like guy raised in Asheville, North Carolina, who's got a stand-up comedy background and grinds more tape than literally anybody else doing this. He's got 500 plus prospects on his board. Yeah, that's what we want, and that's what we're going to get on Thursday. So excited for that. Yeah. Funny, entertaining, very, very knowledgeable. Speaking of knowledgeable, let's tap into John's knowledge here. On one of the news items from last week, there hasn't been a lot of news lately, which is kind of nice. A little bit of a reprieve, more so for John than for us. We still got to do the show no matter what. John could be like, oh, I don't have to write 78 news stories? Excellent.
It's been, I will say, boredom can be good.
You deserve a little boredom after the last 2-3 years that we've had here.
I think you can go send it back further than that.
Yeah, well, that's true too, but especially the last couple. Yeah. There's been no off season between the sale and all the other stuff that's been happening. So this one from Joshua though on Josh Johnson coming in, which was came out of nowhere last week. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, they signed Josh Johnson. What a blast from the past that is. I was still on the beat the first time he was here, but they signed Josh Johnson as a veteran backup quarterback. Obviously, Marcus will be QB2. Is Driscoll still on the roster? Yeah.
No,
or is he?
Driscoll is a guy that they would like to have brought back, and he did a nice job for them. Had a really good camp. I think and he's still in time, but he wants to go somewhere where he can compete, possibly for the number 2 position, and he wasn't going to do that here.
Gotcha. Okay, so Driscoll's out, so they need a QB3. They bring in Josh Johnson. And the question is, how does signing of experienced vet QB3 like Josh Johnson have a positive influence on developing young / back of the roster receivers? If so, how? Thanks. Love the show. So obviously, I think we can talk too about what impact it could have on Jaden. We saw last year how much Marcus had an impact on Jaden, but I think the receiver part of this is very interesting as well, John.
Yeah, and I hadn't looked at it from that perspective because you do, in practice, if you want to help develop, you've got to have a good quarterback throwing to them so they know, they get a picture of the routes, et cetera. And even into preseason games, right? Like that's where you're going to see it as much as anything because now you're getting a chance to be productive with them. And Driscoll did a nice job for them last year. Like I think it's also Craig running scout team, giving a look to the defense. That's where you're going to see that as well. So I think it can have an impact there. I also think there's an impact. Listen, Mariota's had a very positive impact on Jaden. Like that's part of the reason why they wanted to bring him back because he was so good with him. So Johnson can also add to that. I think you don't stick around in the NFL as long as he has if you're not a complete pro. We know that. I mean, to come back, he's brought back to organizations. Now, I know it's different than it was before, but that was
something crazy when he signed last week. I went up, I think CBS Sports had a graphic on Instagram of all the teams he's been to. It's not just that he's been on, I think, 14 teams now. I think he's been on 7 of them twice or 3 times. Organizations love to have this guy in the building.
Yeah, because and so that suggests the preparation and the knowledge and just good in the locker room. But I also think it can be good for a guy like Sam Hartman. So, just another guy to bounce things off of, right? And I think Driscoll could have been that, but I think Johnson with that experience, that again, the professional approach, I think definitely can help. Now, he's still got to make the roster, but from here to there, from here to the end of August, yes, he can help. I don't want to overstate it, but I think the more guys you bring in like that, the better off your organization is. It's just, there's a depth of professionalism, a depth of leadership that matters.
No doubt about it. And I think there's nuance that he can bring in, especially you talk about the receivers. I think that's such an interesting angle to ask it from, for a guy that's played with so many guys. And so I played with X receiver, and I'm going to say X receiver, insert receiver name here, not specifically an X or a Z or a whatever. But I played with this receiver and he liked this route this way. Maybe you should try it. You remind me of him. Like there's these little nuances of route running that Logan and I talk about, and Logan more so because he ran routes in the NFL. But that we talk about all the time of footwork or angles or where your eyes should go so you can read the coverage, because sometimes a route bends versus a different coverage. So there's all these little things that just, if you've been around more guys, and this dude's been around 1,000 players in his career, then it's just invaluable to have that kind of knowledge in the building and to have someone who you can go ask a question. And I think, too, specifically as a QB3, like, of course, if you're going to wind up playing with Jaden, you and Jaden need to be on the same page. But a guy like QB3, like, his job is as much to prepare the team as it is to prepare himself. Of course, he's got to be ready to play worst case scenario. But in many ways, Josh Johnson's job, if he makes this roster, is going to be to go to the Luke McCaffrey's or some of these younger guys, whoever they wind up drafting, and say, hey, what can I do to help you be ready? And then, of course, on defense, same thing. Hey, what can I do to help you guys be ready as the scout team quarterback, as someone who, by the way, also has a great insight on how many different coaches around the league from a game plan standpoint. So there's just a lot of stuff with someone with that much experience brings to the building.
And I also think, going back to your point, it's sometimes the details around, I don't know like how detailed he's going to be on certain things because it's a little bit different. But to your point, like, I think it's also the pacing of a route too. And so like, hey, on this route, what I found has worked well with other guys is you kind of delay just a little bit more on this to create this opening. And I think for scout team, for example, and I like this question because I hadn't thought of it to this depth as well. Like when they signed him, like I knew the professional approach, all that, but to this depth. And again, I don't want to you don't want to go overboard on it. But like if you're running you're running scout team against what offense, and maybe he sees something in the way the cornerback reacts. They're like, hey, listen, if this were a game, I would have done this because you did this. And he has that knowledge of like, what my experience tells me, like you're doing this, like I'm automatically going to go over here. Now in this drill, I'm staying here. Or he might say, because sometimes they will do that, right? You're going to look. Jeremy Reeves would have these discussions with Jaden, had this discussion with Jeremy Reeves last year. It's like, hey, listen, why did you react this way? He goes, because you did this. So like if he's got a ball and the corner starts to break a certain way, maybe he can just, boom, he's going to change it. It's like, that may not be what they were expecting, but like, why did you do that? Because you did this. So he's got that knowledge and experience that, again, we don't, not overstating it, but little things like that can also help. And like, whether he makes the roster or not, if he does some of that stuff in training camp, it could have an impact on a guy in week 7. You know what I mean? And
totally.
So, but yeah, I think to the point, like all those offenses he's played in, he's going to have knowledge of how they want to attack. And not that they're all still the same as when they would play it, but like it definitely, there's only so many offenses you can play in the NFL. And I think it's not just for it's for the players, right? It's the coaches are going to know what they know, and he can help a little bit, certainly with that, but it's really for the teammates because these guys listen to guys like that. And
we also know though that like Cliff will take ideas from anywhere.
Oh, for
and so
sure.
They get into a rut and they're like, "Hey, Josh, what's your favorite play for this?" He's gonna have one.
Yeah,
and they're not afraid to add that to their offense.
And what's funny is before the draft last year, I remember talking to Jay Gruden about like what he liked about Jaden Daniels, and he kind of like he's got some processing like Teddy Bridgewater, but he's got Josh Johnson's legs, and it's funny because that combination, I think some people poo-pooed that. But like Josh has that ability. That's why when they signed him the first time, Jay actually wanted him instead of Sanchez right away because he knew that he could come in and make plays right away because of the legs. And he meant all that stuff as a compliment for Jay, and that he can hang in the pocket, make plays in the pocket, but he also has this ability like this guy that I've coached, right? So, and I, you put those two together, it's a pretty darn good quarterback, and I think Jaden's even way better than that. So, but the point is, like, going back to that point, the last thing I would say on this too is it's also the way guys prepare. Like, if he can go to a young guy and say, listen, you remind me of so-and-so, this is how he got better. Maybe it's the way you prepare going into practice. Now, if you're a receiver, you should be following like, hey, this is what Terry does in the offseason. Do that because it's worked for him. Watch those guys. Like if you're a tight end, watch Zach Ertz and how he prepares, not just in the locker room, whatever, on the field during the special teams drills. What is he working on? That's what I should do. So you can get that, but it's also good to have another voice that can echo some of those thoughts.
No doubt. All right, next question on one of those young receivers comes from Alex Wicks on Instagram. Alex asks, is the team expecting Luke McCaffrey to take a big step this year or just depth? And I think it's an interesting phrasing of the question, John, because it almost is like, do they expect him to start this year or is he a depth piece? Is kind of how I'm reading that. But I think that he could take a big step and also provide depth. But I guess I'll flatten out the question to you. What are the realistic expectations for Luke McCaffrey in year two?
Well, I think one of the clues to me, Craig, is just how his playing time diminished in the second half of the year. It went down. So that to me, you go by that, right? Like this is how he progressed. Like, 'cause early in the year, I kind of felt, and I know others felt, excuse me, that there were times where like, oh, he's capable of a big game because he seems like he's getting open, all that. And that didn't happen. So I don't know really what they're expecting from him in year two. I'm just going by the playtime diminished down the stretch. Like, not like from 30 plays to 0, but it certainly decreased, just like Benson, it decreased. And I think you can, I would say, sometimes I put he and Sinnott in the same boat. Sometimes it takes a few years for them to get that. And I think I don't know about you, but that's kind of how I view McCaffrey. Like it's going to take him maybe a couple years to kind of get that footing in there. He was new. He switched to the position in college. Yep. It does take a minute. I think he has some strengths as a receiver. There are times where he can use his size. He's got good size for playing inside. And you saw that in the preseason at times. But then you look at like, okay, they're bringing in, they re-signed Osborne, there's a lot of depth there. So I would look at him as more right now as a depth piece, but I think it's hard because just again with Sinnott, like how do they progress this summer? And that to me will tell more how they're viewed. But I know that Quinn will talk about those guys. There are some guys year 1 to year 2 that taking a big jump. I look more at like guys like Jordan McGee, if he gets that playtime because he's playing behind Bobby Wagner. So if he gets that, guys like that, I think Johnny Newton can take a jump even though he played. I think there's some of that. I don't know that McCaffrey's in that same boat yet. But I think there are definitely sometimes guys, it's as like, the hard part is he was a higher round draft pick. Like you need him to produce more. But I still, I think depth, special teams. That's how I would view him.
So I would say they have set themselves up that if he is still more depthy, they're okay. They obviously bring in Debo. They bring back Noah Brown. They bring back, Osborne barely played last year, but with his summer, can he acclimate, and has proven that he can play at the NFL level with the one or a couple pretty good years he had in Minnesota earlier in his career. So there are some options there, and they obviously could look at receiver in the draft. I think the thing with Luke is, and first more generally on kind of the role is, their expectation of him, I feel very confident in saying this, John, without having talked to a single person. They expect him to compete because that's how they roll. To use DQs. That's how we get down, is what DQ would say, right? Yeah. So they expect him to come in and compete. And if he is better than Noah Brown and better than KJ Osborne and better than whoever else he's competing with outside of Terry and Debo, then he's going to be the third guy. He can play inside. He can play outside. Like, he's a smart player. But he lacks the nuance of the position because he's still new to the position. And I think, unlike a guy like Sinnott, I think they knew that coming in. I think Sinnott and McCaffrey are in the same bucket, but they weren't expected to be in the same bucket. And that says more about Sinnott than it does about McCaffrey. I mean, Luke was a third-round pick, but he's the last pick in the third round, I think, or second to last, whatever it was, pick 100. So he's basically a fourth-round pick. And if he's a fourth-round pick, how differently do you feel versus a third?
Correct.
And I think from that standpoint, for Luke, the expectation for him is to compete, to get better, to continue learning the position. And if he comes out and is a pretty effective player this year in a depth role and a starter in year 3, that's a pretty, I don't know if it's a home run third round pick. I mean, Terry, you can't say he's a home run and then what is Terry McLaurin? But it's a double. You're safely and securely on base if you get a starter by year 3 out of a third rounder, especially a late third rounder. So that's kind of where I see Luke is he showed some promise last year. I think the kick return piece is interesting. I'm kind of surprised they didn't use him a little bit more as a screen runner because he showed some promise there. And obviously Debo's going to get the majority of those types of opportunities this year. But Diami also emerged last year as excellent in that role, and so those tended to go that direction. But it does feel like if he can figure out how to use his size a little bit more, maintain and even grow in the physicality realm where you can trust him more in the run game, that he can have a role in this offense. And that, by the same token, he's going to have to compete for it because that's just how this team is. They're not going to give him anything because that's not how they believe in doing business.
No, it's not. And I think, but that's why I say, it's okay if he's a depth piece because you need that. And, especially this year, I think it'd be nice for them to add a young receiver who is capable of being more than just a depth piece, like a guy that could elevate to the number 2 role opposite McLaurin and be a consistent threat in that role. I don't know that they necessarily have, they don't have that young guy in that role at this point. But if you, like you said, where he was drafted, if he elevates to being a consistent performer, provides depth, can help on special teams, that's what you need. If you in a draft produce, this is way back when, it's I talked to GMs about this, 2 to 3 starters and 2 to 3 guys who contribute to winning, not just contribute, but contribute to winning.
Yeah.
Last year's draft definitely has that. And if he contributes to winning, then that's a good thing. But you still want to see him be more productive. There were flashes last year, especially early on, where he was getting open when Jaden would scramble and wasn't always seeing him, but he was getting open in those spots. He made some tough catch. He had a couple tough grabs over the middle that were really nice. So you saw that stuff. But little things like the nuances of route running is it can be the way you tilt your head, how you keep your head when you're approaching, where you're, again, how you're stemming, how you're selling the fake to create those little openings that veteran receivers can do. And that can take a minute to learn, especially if you're in college doing that, well, you switch, you're not going to have that stuff down. And because you're just not. You're in college, you can get by on athleticism and creating that because the corners just aren't that as good consistently. In the NFL, you need to have more. And can he elevate in that area to become more? Can he become productive? I think he can. But to what level, I think there's a wait and see. But if he is a good depth piece, I don't think that's a problem.
No, and I think the other last thing about Luke is you trust the person, you trust the work ethic. Yeah. He's going to work really hard. He's a good athlete, so there's a lot to like there for him in terms of moving forward in this role. Take Command Podcast, John Keim with us today for the mailbag episode. Again, Jeremy Green will be with us later in the week, and then Logan will be back because the NFL draft is somehow next week. We're 9 days away from the first round, John, and so we got a bunch of draft questions, and we're going to dive in with your alma mater here. This is right. A John Keim specific question. Right. Let's go. If the Commanders could draft one of the Ohio State prospects in this draft, who would you want it to be? Well, that's a question from Tom 0-8.
Okay. So this is going to be a little bit of I'm going to give you two names, but for a reason.
Of course right? You are. No, of course you are. But he's trying to get multiple Buckeyes in the building. I see what you're up to. You can't fool me.
Say, like the guy that I keep going back to is TreVeyon Henderson. That would be my number one thought because I think of what he adds as a player is really good for what this team could use.
Explosive really
halfback. Explosive in the screen game with him, his ability to pass protect, his ability in space. He's not just a third down back, but that explosive aspect of his game is really good for what they need. I think the best player from that group is Simmons, the tackle. And they don't need that left tackle. So that's why I say, before they got Tunsil, I would have said him. But I think for what they need, TreVeyon would be the guy. I just don't think they're good. The first round I think would be too rich for a running back for me. And the second round might be too low to get him. So yeah. I don't think he's got it. So then it's like, well, was it JTT? And I think he'd be good as well. I know they had they talked to Denzel Burke, the corner, but I think JTT would be after that. But TreVeyon is the guy that I would pick.
Yeah, JTT, one of two Ohio State edges. I don't know if you and Logan have talked about this. I don't think he's super high on either of those guys. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Logan's 100% right. We'd love for Logan to be 100% right.
Yeah,
but
there are other ends that I would look at before them, and it's not. Listen, what Jack Sawyer did against Texas will be etched in my brain forever. And those guys did a really good job there. I do think there's some other defensive ends that I would look at and say, okay, this is their production in college, but this is their potential in the NFL. And have they reached that? Both those guys played for 4 years. They are what they are. There are other guys like Femi Ofadu from UCLA, who is very intriguing because he's a newbie at that spot, right? So those kind of guys I'd look at more. That's why I say I go back to Henderson, period. And Judkins is another one, but Henderson, that's the go with that.
I think both the running backs are interesting. I do think I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say it, but considering in our Hoffman Show mock draft the other day on the radio, I wound up picking an Ohio State player in the first round, and it was Igbuka. So I
can't believe that I forgot to mention him. But that guy is he's like Terry McLaurin in terms of culture setter, right?
Yes.
And he's God bless. I can't believe I forgot about him. I was in my head, I'm I know I'm forgetting somebody.
If they wind up drafting him, we'll delete this clip. That way he doesn't ever find it.
Yeah. No, listen, that guy was tremendous. And I also think, and to the reason why this speaks to this, that to me, he's certainly not overlooked, but it's always been somebody else, right? They had so many good receivers. There's always somebody else that was oh yeah. And they have Igbuka, who is really, really good. And he can play. I think he can play inside and out. He makes tough catches. He's not going to be the explosive guy, but he gets open. And it's funny when you're looking at guys this is Puka Nacua for the Rams. They took him because he got open. There are some guys that know how to get open, and that's the job in the NFL. You may have speed, you may have this, but if you're not creating separation, you're not going to be a threat in the NFL. And I think Igbuka does that, but he makes tough catches too. So that would be actually, let me revise. After Henderson, it would be Igbuka.
Yeah, I don't think that's the best way the board falls for Washington. I think one of the edges falling, Ezeraku, is the best bet for Washington. When what you ultimately want, everyone's best player in need. And I'm what you want is the best player available to fill one of your needs. That's the A1 how the board falls. And so in that way, I think Ezeraku falling or whatever, Shamar Stewart, whatever the edge that they like and believe in, falling to them at 29, because for whatever other reason, other people don't believe in that player. That's what you want to happen. And there is a clearly, because I was the one making the pick, a way where the best player falling to them is Emeka Egbuka. If all the edges go early and you're looking at, the best edge available being someone like a James Pierce, who I don't think is going to wind up on their board because of kind of the inconsistent football character stuff where his effort and all that kind of stuff is
a polite way to put it.
Yeah, it's not going to get the commander tag, James Pierce Jr. Let's put it that way. And Emeka Egbuka is going to have like a giant button that's like says commander on it if it's up to Adam Peters. So I think that there's definitely a way where Egbuka is the best player available for them at 29. And I agree with you. I think he fits he can fit anywhere. This is a different analogy.
Can't believe I forgot him.
Yeah, like
I would.
Last night, John, I was telling you before we started the show, I was doing all the WNBA draft stuff, and the Mystics took this guard, Sonia Citron, and Notre Dame guard. And it doesn't matter what team you put her on, she will fit. She can play with literally anybody because she just has this not great at anything, but really good at a lot of things, basically everything skill set that just, you can put her at guard, you can put her at small forward, you can put her next to a shooter, you can say, hey, we need you to handle the ball. She can do anything. And that's how I feel about Emeka Egbuka in a receiving core. You could literally put him in any receiver room in the league and he'd be fine. He is to that extent. I think he is scheme agnostic. And typically we think of scheme agnostic prospects as like Myles Garrett is scheme agnostic because he's so good it doesn't matter. You just be like, you go be Myles Garrett and it'll work. And I think in a very different way, Emeka Egbuka is scheme agnostic. Sure, there's probably certain things you can ask him to do where he's better at, but it just feels like he's good at everything. And I think because they've got this kind of specialty weapon in Debo and then Terry, adding him as a third guy where you can put Debo wherever you need to on any given snap, have Egbuka line up in the other spot that's all of a sudden vacated by Debo, whether it's inside or outside. Like that's a real, like, of the receivers, in some ways, he's the most intriguing guy to me for Washington. And so that's probably my answer is Egbuka. But I think the Henderson answer is great too, if somehow he falls to 61.
Well, because I keep thinking like for the first pick that if it's not a D end, it'll probably be that a corner would be the way I would look hard. So like that's a possibility as well. So I kind of took him off the board a little bit just because I think they'll go defense. And then I don't think he's going to be like Egbuka would not be there for them in the second round at all.
No chance.
But I think to your point too, like I want to stick on him because, like high character guy. And he is like, if you said, who's a Dan Quinn type player, it's Egbuka. And part of that too is he's a really good blocker. And I think the other thing too, as a receiver that I think McLaurin benefited from this as well, when you're like he's playing with Marvin Harrison, like he played.
I actually saw the stat in the Beast. Dane Brugler had this. 4 different receivers he's played with that were top 20 picks.
Yeah. Garrett Wilson. I mean, Jeremiah Smith, he played. The point is like when you're a receiver, like you don't want to bring the diva types in, right? And when you're surrounded by that and you're still productive, I think that speaks a lot to who you are, right? And like, you're not going to be, I don't think he's going to come in here and say like, hey, I'm Emeka Egbuka, give me the ball. It's like, I'm going to do my job because that's what I did in college. And it's what got me here. And it's what helped them win a national title, right? Like
how annoyed would Mikey Sanders still be, by the way, if they did that? He's just, how many Buckeyes can he have, in that room with him?
Because like he's 2 lockers down. He's like, there's only 1 locker separating he and Terry. So,
put Egbuka there. Let's do it.
Yeah, put it right. Yeah. And
John's just sauntering over to that part of the locker room every day.
Part of the locker room all the time.
Hey, Mikey, you like my shirt?
but I do think like a lot of that stuff speaks volumes about how he would fit and be productive, knowing how to be productive in those roles, but also filling what they kind of love in a player. Like that is absolutely. I think I just don't.
Good chance he's not available. I think he's probably off the board.
In an ideal world, in an ideal situation, I think they go defense with that first pick. Whether it's an end or a corner, right? Or maybe even a safety. Like give me a playmaker there, but it's hard. Listen, if you're a true playmaker, chances are you're going a lot higher than this. But like, give me a guy.
I think that's one of the reasons why he could fall, though, is like, I don't know that you look at him and you're like,
I'm talking about
playmaker.
defense. I'm talking about defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is a reason why Igbuka could be available, is like the playmakers go with the higher ceilings go higher. And it's just like, hey, we got the really good football player that's going to be just short of a Pro Bowler every year of his career. Sick. Sign me up for that. Yeah. All right. Another draft question I thought was really fascinating. This is a good one from Bryce on Instagram. Of course, you can submit at hoffman.sports. You can also follow John on Instagram, by the way, at John Keim ESPN. But Bryce says, hey, Craig, love the podcast. Looking forward to the draft and finally seeing what the heck is going to happen. Question for the next mailbag. How much GPS data is out there now for college players? Are we at a point where the 40 is less relevant because we can get in-game data that measures acceleration, top speed, etc.? So Logan and I have talked about this before, John, but I don't think we've talked about it this draft cycle, so it's worth re-upping. So hello to our new audience and, refresher for those that have been long time listeners and heard us talk about this before. But a draft profile is just that. It's a profile with a lot of different data points. And what you're always looking for is the pieces to go together, the puzzle pieces to fit. Because then you're like, okay, we know who this guy is. And so what I think winds up happening to directly answer the question, yes, there's basically GPS data for all of the major college players. If you have like a D3 guy or whatever, like that might be a little harder to get the GPS data. But amongst the main schools in all of the major conferences, you've got GPS data as an NFL team for those players. So what you're looking for is, does the GPS data match the 40 time and match what you see on tape, what you feel on tape? Does that guy play up to his speed? And so that's kind of the answer is it less relevant? Like the 40? Slightly, because you do have the GPS data. And that really is kind of backing up what you see on tape. Do we feel like Matthew Golden's a good example, right? He runs a 4.29, but if you watch the tape, you're like, I don't know that I feel that 4.29. Exactly. I'd want to go look at the GPS data and see like, okay, is he moving at the type of speed that says, oh, he can run a 4.29 and we can get that out of him on film? Or is he just like, and it just looks smooth? Or is that not actually how he plays? But also I think it's worth pointing out that the 40 is only really relevant as a 40-yard dash. Corner, I don't know, safety-ish. Like there's just not a lot of positions where 40 time translates directly to efficacy. And it's not, again, it's a data point. It has varying, depending on the position, varying amounts of importance. The GPS data, you want to see it kind of match the 40 time. And I think that's how I would answer that, John. And anything you would add on that front in terms of how the profile comes together?
And first of all, the more information you have, the better off you are on a player. And this gives you just more information, I think, to your point, right? But there are like, the 40 time is great for fans, I think, right? Like it's a measuring point for them. And I think it's part of what teams will look at. Now, I think Golden is a perfect example. I think if a guy runs like Kyle Hamilton did not have a great 40 time, right? But he can play that position. Why? So
never showed up on tape. You're never like, this guy's not fast enough.
Exactly. Because it's funny because when you watch a guy, like it's really about reaction speed. And are you able to diagnose a play? Like Ed Reed, I don't know what Ed Reed's 40 time was. I know he was unbelievable.
I do think he ran like a 4.3 something.
All right, well,
but there you also probably could see that on tape. I also might be making that up because of how good Ed Reed was.
Well, but the point is, I don't know.
Apparently he's like 4.57. There you go. Right, what do I know?
There you go. Perfect. But what you do know is the preparation he put in, the way he would con quarterbacks and get them to react the way he wants them to do. And the way, you know what I mean? Like it was the play speed. And the play speed comes to me, it's anticipation, it's instincts, but those instincts are honed by preparation and film study, because you can get burned by instincts if you don't have the preparation behind it. So I think like, to me, like what matters more, if you're looking at a corner, like, yeah, okay, he runs a 4.5, but he has good length. What's his short area quickness like? These guys will look at, when I talk to these guys about corners, they don't say, well, I want to see the 40 time. It's like, it's ball skills. It's short area quickness. So like that 3-cone drill is going to tell you, if you're looking at a defensive end, they're not looking at 40 time 10-yard split. What's the 10-yard split? That's about get off. So I think there's, and like a running back, Emmitt Smith did not have a great 40 time, but it's vision.
He got more rushing yards than anyone in the history of the league, so it worked out quite all right.
These guys had some guys, probably when you were back there, I forget some of the names, but they had guys that were really fast. They were not good running backs because that's not what made a good running back. So the 40 time, I think, is like you said, like a receiver, I do want to see, if this guy is like a 4.7 guy, like, ooh, how's it going to translate?
Yeah. And that's the thing. There's thresholds, right? Like corner, the reason I say for corner, right? With rare exception, if you're not 4.6 or better, you can't play corner in the NFL. You are just not fast enough to keep up in the NFL. So it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just kind of a box to check as a threshold. Right. Being a 4.3 versus a 4.5 is not going to make you a better corner. Both times mean if you have the other requisite skills, you can play corner in the NFL. If you run a 4.8, you must. I hope that you slipped, and you also have crazy long arms, and. But also, it's worth pointing out, like on the
if you're right,
40
Greg,
times.
If you're running a 4.8 and the 40 as a corner, you're sitting here doing one of these shows.
Yeah, which nothing wrong with that. I would love to run a 4.8. But I think the other thing too is like if all of a sudden, let's say there's a mismatch between the GPS data, what you see on film, and the 40, and like why was this 40 so slow? They'll go back and watch the film of the 40 and be like, oh, because that guy absolutely stunk up his start. Clearly, his speed coach was like irate at him not paying attention and not applying the things on game day. And maybe that's something that I also want to know is like, hey man, why was your start so bad in your 40? Like, haven't you been preparing for this for months? Like that, in some ways, that is more of the red flag than the actual time. Yeah. How well do you learn? How well do you follow instructions? How well do you execute under pressure? But if ultimately it's like, yeah, I didn't feel that good. I had food poisoning and I just decided to compete anyway. It's like, okay, fine. Go run at your pro day, and then you go run a 4.6 at your pro day instead of the 4.8. And it's like, okay, we'll draft you. But like there are if it doesn't match up, you figure out why, and then you decide whether to throw out that outlier piece of data or whether it's relevant. And that's why this is very much art, not science.
Right. And also, by the way, I was a 4.6 guy, so just throwing it out there.
You were back in the day. You were quick,
but I'm still sitting here, so it didn't help me enough. But
had the speed, maybe not the size.
Well, yeah, Anyways, but you're not also like in the NFL. You're not running from a sprinter stance.
Yes.
So like that. So
but that 10-yard split for a DN is a heck of a test for a 3-point stance get off.
Correct. That's why like you're going to look at. You want that, you start to look at the top pass rushers and what were their 10-yard splits in the NFL. And typically it's in that 1.55 to 1.60 range. Typically, you're going to get some outliers that may be a little bit beyond there, but you don't want it too much beyond there because, like, again, it's all about the get off. And short area quickness for a corner because of the way the routes are run. It's not just, hey, we're going to run down the field and see who wins that race. It's, okay, boom, how can you react to cuts? And, flipping your hips, et cetera. And so all that stuff is going to matter more than the 40 time, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And usually what it does is like you said with Golden, okay, 4.29. Oh, now let's go back and watch more of him to see why that didn't translate into more certain types of plays.
Yeah, for sure. That just gave me an idea too. We owe the audience a crossover episode with the Train with the Best podcast, my training podcast. We typically do it at the Combine, and we just couldn't make schedules work this year. But it would be fun to redesign an NFL Combine. Like, what would we, if we wanted to get athletic testing that we thought actually mattered, what would that look like? So put that mailbag question to myself, put that one in the back pocket for me, Logan, and Gorez at a later date. Wrapping up here on Take Command, John Keim with us today. Of course, ESPN.com. You can read all of his work there and listen to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe as well. You're so good at saying that stuff, and I always forget. And I do it. Everyone's like, "Oh, we love your rambling outros." I'm like, "Thank God you make it that far." I probably should say that stuff earlier on in the show. But we're doing a mailbag today. Last couple of questions here, draft adjacent. Stephen Healer asks, "Hey Craig, love you and Take Command." Thanks, Stephen. Mailbag question: hypothetically, for where the Commanders are currently, would you prefer picking up extra picks this year or better round picks next year? For example, we trade from 61 to 80. Would you rather have a 4th round pick in 2025 or a 3rd round pick in 2026? Obviously, 2025 gives us a player now on a weak roster, but potentially a better player next year is the trade-off. Again, weak roster, his words, not mine. But, John, hypothetically speaking here, you got 2 trade offers on the table from the same team. You get a 4th rounder this year, 3rd rounder next year to move back. Which one are you taking?
I'll take the pick this year because I think there's a lot of value in rounds 2 through 4 this year. And so I'm going to take this year, and I'm going to worry about next year because you're going to get a couple comp picks, and maybe you can do some maneuver. At least I think there would be I think they're in line for 1 comp pick for next year. And so you're going to add to that already. And I know it would be technically a better pick, but if I know, like in rounds 2 through 4, like there are multiple guys that I think can help this team this year, then I want to get that. So in my ideal world for them, you're coming up with a D end, a cornerback, a running back, and then an interior O lineman, right? Like that would be, I think, a really good haul. And in those rounds, you can find those. Like you get D end, corner higher, running back, and interior in 3rd and 4th. And I think you'd feel really good about that and continue building that way. So I would take it this year for that reason. And again, I think you can also maneuver next year too. It's not like you can't do that. So if you can do that this year, you're going to probably be able to do it next year as well and pick up something. But, I think so Craig, and the last thing I'll say before you get going, but if they needed a quarterback and needed to move up and you said like, hey, don't like the quarterbacks in this draft class, whatever, next year, let's get some more ammunition to maybe move up, then I might look harder at that. But I would want to add to this year's haul. And I do think because this draft is good in rounds 2 through 4, take the known commodity at this point.
I think that's really interesting because my instinct was take the better pick and have a little bit of patience. But I think you've made a really compelling argument for this team specifically and this draft specifically. I think one thing that is worth pointing out in this is that while we have, we go through the season, you and I were talking before we started recording, which is like how crazy this season was, and especially the playoff run. And then you wake up one day and it's over and you're like, oh, I get ready for the draft now. We haven't looked a lick at the 2026 draft.
Yeah, right.
Adam Peters has a bit of an inkling, and he's got scouts that have an inkling, more than an inkling, because as you're watching your 2025 guys, inevitably there's some guy, you're like, who's that guy? Oh, he's next year. Okay, cool. Let's make a note. We'll come back to this school next year and scout him. So they have a better feel for the 26 draft and kind of the contour, the shape, the strengths, the weaknesses, round by round. And that'll all change, but like you at least on a large scale have a feel for it. And so because this year's draft is so strong in that 3rd, 4th round area, even 5th round in some of the positions that you might be attacking, I think it's a really compelling argument to just say, let's figure out this year, and next year we'll deal with the next year. The comp picks, that whole thing. I think you've hit the formula correctly, and I think you've actually convinced me that I would probably do the same thing. I think generally though, I'm more so of like, I can get a 3rd round pick, sweet, sign me up. Like 3rd round is typically where a lot of that talent cliff winds up being. And if you can get someone, you can get an extra day 2 pick. 1, it's ammunition to move around and trade up, and it just hits differently. And 2, those typically are going to wind up obviously as better players as well. So I would tend to lean towards, generally speaking, taking the 3rd rounder in the future, and just having a little bit of patience. But it also depends on your team circumstances, the shape of each draft, what you need, all that kind of stuff that you talked about. I think that was really well explained. You're good at this, John.
Yeah. The other thing too, Craig, is where in the 4th round are we talking? And if it's like a low 4th round pick, well, now I might look at it a little bit differently. If it's a high 4th round pick, absolutely I would take that because then it's like, well, what if next year, let's say if it's a high 4th round and you take the 3rd rounder next year, what if it's like 15 pick difference? Is it really that much of a difference to wait? But if we're talking a low 4th and then a high 3rd, that's almost like that's a couple rounds difference, really. So that would be the other part of it to me. Is I always like before I'd settle like,
do I think the other team's going to stink this year?
Right, and yeah, I mean, and as you know, like I mean, if somebody done that with Washington last year, like they would have thought like, oh, it's going to be a pretty good pick in this area, and then it wasn't. So. Right. But you don't know year to year. But I would say like where right now in the 4th round, that would be the other final part to know. Because if it's a low 4th round pick, then I might feel a little bit differently than it's mid to high.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point too. Who's your trade partner? What do you think of them? And it's a guessing game, but it's one that you have to do because there isn't really a better way to evaluate it. Speaking of making trades, our last question comes from Javier, and Javier said a bunch of nice things about the podcast. I don't need to read all of the compliments of ourselves, John, but Avi, thanks for the nice note. To the question, do either of you have any insight into how the war room works on draft day? Specifically, are there tactics that GMs use when trying to leverage more picks while trading up or down? For example, if a QB needy team wants to move up in the draft, will the team on the clock give a heads up to the other teams that may want to trade up? Or will they exaggerate how many calls or trade packages they're receiving for that pick? Or is it more of a gentleman's agreement to be honest with one another? Thank you both. I think this is a great question, and it's something that I think Adam has talked about before. It's something that, to go to other sports, like Will Dawkins has talked about this quite a bit with the Wizards. Like, you have to build relationships in the league and have trust, but you also can't screw yourself. So how do you think that this goes down, and what do you know from talking to folks over the years that you've been doing this of how these trade calls go down and the negotiations?
I think a good GM will not try to snowball you, because if you do that once, word spreads, and then you ruin perhaps your ability to make trades either with that team, with a number of teams. Because if you try to screw Howie Roseman, I'm sure there's going to be a wrath coming down from Philly, right? You may feel like, hey, I love that we made this trade, but you can't sit there and lie to them, because if they find that out later, well, Roseman's going to talk to other people, et cetera. And then it's like, well, can we trust Adam Peters? I don't think Adam Peters would ever do that. Now, perhaps they've had some guys here in the past that may have tried to do that, whether it's a Bruce Allen, Vinny Serrato. I don't know, but
wouldn't surprise me.
Right. I know for Bruce, it was always about trying to win the deal, win the trade versus make a good deal. And a good deal can help team X and team Y. Now, an agent, when you're negotiating with them, you may not be able to always trust them, because that's the stuff, you hear that all the time. And I remember, this is a little thing, back in the day, they had a lineman here, Randy Thomas, played for the Jets, was a really good guard for a while, before your time. But he was visiting here as a free agent. This is back when free agents always visited before they signed. Now they just what's the deal? Boom, there you go. They don't visit facilities. Randy was a good guard, was visiting, and he had told them that, and his side told me he had a visit lined up the next day in Dallas. Well, the Dallas coach was Bill Parcells, who coached him in the Jets. Well, Parcells had, and Randy Thomas told us later, Parcells had no interest in signing him. That was done specifically to give him leverage with Washington, and it worked. So you see that more in free agency, in the past. Now, I think you see that, but with a trade partner like that, if you want to continue to make deals in this league, you have to be more upfront. Maybe not so much and if you have 3 teams interested, you better have 3 teams interested, because if it gets back that you didn't, if there was no one else interested, then I think it ruins your ability in the future to make good deals.
I think there's also a level of trust that you have to in order to try to get the deals that you want. So in other words, let's say you want a player and you call a team hey, we want this guy. If he's still available when you're on the clock, give us a call. You have to trust that team is going to treat that information with the level of security that you want, and that they're going to be honest with you back and say, hey, well, we've already got a call from another team. And I'm sure there is a protocol of let's say the Jets call and the Bengals call and you're Washington. I don't know whether you say, hey, thanks for the info. We've already had the Jets call. You guys get on the phone and see who's going to offer us the best. I don't know how the machinations of that work, because I could imagine a bunch of different ways, and I could go down in my imagination rabbit hole here, and this podcast could become 2 hours long. But we're not going to do that. But in terms of how it goes down, you have to have those types of conversations, and some of those happen before you're on the clock. Some of those happen before all the information is available, because you have to set up the deals that you want to make, and so. Realistically, if you have 2 teams, 3 teams, you're working the phones, and you might have multiple people working the phones. So your communication has to be on point between your GM, your assistant GM, let's say your director of college scouting is best buds with the director of college scouting at another team. You might have those two guys on the phone working out something and getting a feel for how badly they want this player or whatever it might be. And then there's also kind of, I think the other part, we talked about this a little bit on, I think the last show it was, John. We got this question again today. So if you asked the question about like trade charts and all that kind of stuff, check out the end of the last show because I think we answered it then. But there's kind of different rules on pricing depending on what you're moving up for. If you're moving up for a quarterback, it's kind of understood. We're going to time and a half, or all the picks are worth a certain number of points on these trade charts. And if you're moving up for a quarterback, you're going to multiply that total by 1.5 because that's how it works. And so there are certain things in terms of kind of the way business is done that all the GMs more or less agree upon. And if you don't agree, well, you're going to have a really hard time making a deal. And so I think that's, to me, kind of where it comes down is there is both a gentleman's agreement, but also a marketplace. And the market is going to regulate itself in that way when it comes to these deals. And if you don't play by the rules, then ultimately the market's not going to wind up working out for you in the long term.
And I think a bigger key than trying to hoodwink somebody is sticking to what you feel you want or need. And because that's what you're going to see more like, no, we want to get a fifth for this pick as well. Like that's our price. And if you stick to that, that's how you can maybe get, maybe muscle the other team into giving you what you want. Like we're sticking to our guns here. And if you want to do the deal, this is what it takes. If you don't, then don't. And, you might think like, gosh, you're a tough negotiator, but there's, that going in, right? But it's not about them trying to lie to you. It's about them just sticking, like, Howie Roseman's going to stick to certain things, right? And
we saw it last year, right? The Commanders released that footage of Adam just being like, God, you're a pain in the butt.
Right. But I tell you what, like Adam likes dealing with him. Like I think they have a good relationship. And, it's important because you do have to deal with them. And it's also, sometimes you might like, it can be, listen, man, there are a lot like there's reasons why certain things spread around the league is for reporters, for national reporters, because these guys talk too. Not that they're going to sit there and talk during the draft process like, hey, we love this guy. But sometimes, during the draft, like, hey, this team is calling up about this guy. So you may have to move up higher to get him if you really want him. If you come to us, like it's there, but you may have to go higher. Like you want to develop those because sometimes it can help you maybe gain more information about where you need to get get a certain guy. So, but yeah, if you start to, I don't doubt that that's happened in the past because, it's not every GM is a good one and not every GM believes in that. I don't know. But I think if you want to last in that role and make good trades, then you do have to take that approach.
For sure. And that's a good place to end it with a reminder that we are officially in silly season the next 9 days. Not take everything you hear with a grain of salt, but if all of a sudden something comes out of wildly left field, you're like, that's it. That's weird. There's a chance it's weird for a reason. So be on your toes the next couple of days here as we lead up to the draft in terms of rumors that are flying around. There's teams that are trying to throw curveballs and misinformation. That way they can make the deal that they want without someone else, usurping them, et cetera, et cetera. All right. That is our show for today. We'll be back on Thursday with a 7-round mock draft with Jeremy Green. We'll simulate all the non-Commanders picks, but we'll try to make a couple trades if they present themselves, and it'd be fun to do that with Jeremy. In the meantime, John, thank you so much for doing this. Where can people check out your work if they want more from you up to the draft and beyond?
Obviously, ESPN.com, the number one place. And then, and I have a story up now. This wasn't about the draft, it was about Jaden Daniels and just like the development from year 1 to year 2 and talking to a bunch of coaches from the owners' meetings about how do you help a guy progress as the NFL tries to figure him out. I say try to because I don't think they will, but as they try to figure out what's the key in helping him develop and continue to maximize his ability. That's on ESPN.com. We'll have draft stuff. And then, of course, on the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and then YouTube, Empire Media, AMPIRE. There you go. It's on YouTube. So there you go. Thanks, Craig. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was a blast. Again, we'll be back on Thursday. Like and subscribe if you made it this far on YouTube. If you're just listening and you're not subscribed, come on, let's go. Hit that button, and we'll see you in your feed next time the episode comes out, because that's how subscribing works. Thanks for explaining how subscriptions work, Craig. It's 2025. Clearly, this show is over. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.